I never expected a widow's teasing smirk to unravel my heart, but that night, curiosity became something far deeper. I remember that night with almost too much clarity, as if my mind refuses to let a single detail fade. It was a small neighborhood gathering, the kind where people drift between the kitchen and the backyard, laughter spilling into the night air. I hadn't even planned to stay long, just a quick hello, a drink in hand, and maybe an excuse to slip away unnoticed. But then I saw her. She was leaning against the edge of the patio railing, a half-finished glass of wine in her hand, the kind of posture that spoke of quiet confidence. She didn't need to compete for attention, and yet every time I caught myself looking around, my gaze seemed to return to her. There was something about the way she carried herself, graceful, sure, but with an undercurrent of solitude that drew me in. I told myself not to stare. After all, she was older, elegant in a way that belonged to someone who had lived, who had weathered storms and somehow come out more composed because of them. And yet, I couldn't help the flicker of curiosity that stirred in me. At some point, our eyes met. Just for a second, but it was enough. There was no mistaking the slight lift of her brow, the trace of amusement playing on her lips. She had caught me. Later, when the evening had softened into smaller circles of conversation, I found myself within earshot of her voice. Low, smooth, touched with humor. I don't even remember the words she spoke, only that I lingered nearby, pretending to refill my drink when really, I just wanted to listen. It didn't take her long to notice. She turned toward me, her gaze direct, unwavering. The corner of her mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something sly, something playful. Don't pretend you're not curious, she said. The words hit harder than they should have. Simple, teasing, but delivered with a certainty that left me exposed. I felt heat climb into my face, and I stammered something I can't even recall. What I do remember is the sound of her laugh afterward, soft, amused, not unkind. In that moment, the noise of the party faded. The clinking glasses, the overlapping conversations, the background music, all of it dimmed, as though the night had shifted its focus entirely. She stepped closer, not invading my space but enough to make me feel the subtle weight of her presence. Her perfume lingered in the air between us, jasmine and something warm I couldn't place. I realized then that curiosity wasn't something I could brush aside. It had already taken root. And while she returned to her conversation as if nothing had happened, I stood there with her words looping in my mind. Don't pretend you're not curious. The truth was, I wasn't pretending at all. I thought the night was over. The party had thinned out, people leaving in pairs or small groups, their laughter fading into the cool air. I lingered near the door, debating whether to say goodbye or just slip out unnoticed. That's when she appeared beside me. The widow. Heading home, she asked, her tone light, almost casual, though her eyes held something sharper. I nodded, fumbling with the sleeves of my jacket. Yeah. Just a short walk. She tilted her head, considering me for a moment, then said, I'll walk with you. It's late. It wasn't a question. It was an offer delivered with quiet authority, and I found myself agreeing before I had the chance to think. The streets were hushed, empty except for the distant hum of a car or the faint bark of a dog. Our footsteps fell into an easy rhythm, the sound of her heels softer than I expected on the pavement. She drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and in the dim glow of the street lamps, I caught the curve of her profile, strong, serene, yet touched with something delicate. At first, we spoke about nothing, neighbors, the weather, the usual small talk that fills the silence between two people who aren't sure how close they're allowed to step. But as the blocks slipped by, the conversation shifted. She asked about my work, my ambitions. I could tell she wasn't asking to be polite, she was listening. Every answer I gave seemed to matter, and that was disarming in its own way. When she spoke about herself, her words carried weight. She mentioned her late husband without dramatics, just a simple fact laid bare. Her voice didn't break, but I noticed the slight pause before she continued, as if she had to steady herself. In that pause, I felt her humanity, not the confident figure from the party, but the woman behind it, with edges worn down by loss. And for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I admitted things I rarely voiced aloud. How I often felt out of place with people my own age, how conversation sometimes felt shallow, how I longed for sincerity. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss it. Instead, she nodded with a knowing softness, like she understood far more than she said. At one point, as we turned a corner, her hand brushed against mine. Just the lightest touch, accidental perhaps, but it lingered in my awareness long after. I felt the coolness of her fingers, the delicate graze of skin, and it sent a current through me that I couldn't shake. The night air grew colder, and she drew her shawl closer again. Without thinking, I slowed my pace, as though matching myself to her steps, protective without meaning to be. She glanced at me then, her eyes catching the glow of the streetlight, and for a second, she looked almost grateful. We reached my street too soon. She smiled, not the smirk from earlier, but something quieter, gentler. "Good night," she said. And though she turned to leave, I stood there long after, the echo of her presence wrapped around me like the night itself. A few days passed before I saw her again. I had convinced myself that maybe it was nothing, that maybe the pull I felt that night was only a trick of the moment, the wine, the quiet streets, the late hour. But when she invited me over for coffee one afternoon, the truth became harder to ignore. Her house surprised me. It wasn't grand or overly polished, but lived in, filled with warmth. Framed photographs lined the shelves, a mixture of smiling faces, family gatherings, a man whose presence lingered even in still images. The faint scent of lavender drifted through the rooms, mixed with the sharper aroma of freshly brewed coffee. She led me into the kitchen, where the light from the window spilled across the wooden table. We sat opposite each other, steaming cups between us, and for the first few minutes it felt like any ordinary visit. Safe. Friendly. But the safety didn't last. Our words began to stretch beyond the surface. She spoke of her husband, not in detail, but in enough fragments that I caught glimpses of the love and loss she carried. She didn't cry, and she didn't dramatize it, but every so often, her voice softened, dipping lower as if some memories were too delicate to touch directly. I listened, unsure of what to say, but I found myself leaning closer, caught not only by her words but by the rare openness in them. And maybe that's what gave me the courage to share something in return. I admitted, awkwardly, that sometimes I felt restless, out of place. That I often craved conversations that dug deeper than the usual jokes and half-hearted plans. She didn't laugh. She didn't make me feel young or foolish. She just regarded me with that steady gaze of hers, her eyes calm and knowing. "There's nothing wrong with wanting more," she said quietly, and for a moment, it felt like she was speaking to herself as much as to me. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was full, carrying the weight of what had just been shared. My fingers circled the rim of my coffee cup, the ceramic warm beneath my skin, grounding me in the present moment. When I finally stood to leave, I expected a polite farewell, maybe a smile, maybe a wave. Instead, as I reached for my jacket, she stepped closer. Her hand found my forearm, light, steady, deliberate. It wasn't much. Just the warmth of her palm against me, her fingers pressing gently as if to anchor me there for one extra second. But the touch lingered in a way that stole the air from my chest. I looked up, meeting her eyes. There was no smirk this time, no playful teasing. Just quiet acknowledgement, a soft admission hidden in the smallest of gestures. Then she let go, retreating back into her composed grace, as if nothing had happened. But as I walked out the door, the place where her hand had rested seemed to burn with something I couldn't name, something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The next time I saw her, the sun was high, and the air smelled of summer earth. She had asked if I could help her with some gardening, nothing serious, just a few things in the yard she couldn't manage on her own. I agreed without hesitation, though I knew it wasn't the plants that had drawn me there. Her garden was small but full of life, flowers blooming in neat rows, vines curling against the wooden fence. She wore a loose linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a wide-brimmed hat that shielded her face from the sun. Even so, I could see the way the light softened her features, the faint trace of lines that only made her expression more striking. We worked side by side, our hands in the soil, the air alive with birdsong. It was ordinary work, pulling weeds, patting earth around fresh roots. And yet it didn't feel ordinary at all. The nearness of her, the sound of her laughter when I clumsily dropped a trowel, the way our movements seemed to fall into sync, all of it made the moment feel charged with something unspoken. At one point, as I knelt to press a plant into place, she leaned over to hand me a glove I had dropped. Her fingers brushed against mine, brief but enough to still me. When I glanced up, she was already looking at me, her expression unreadable, but her eyes holding mine for a heartbeat too long. Later, as we stood to take a break, she laughed at something I said, a genuine laugh, light and unguarded. For that moment, she didn't look like the woman carrying years of loss. She looked younger, freer, her head tilted back slightly, sunlight catching in her hair. And then, as if realizing she had allowed too much to slip through, her laughter softened. "You've got something here," she said suddenly, stepping closer. Before I could react, she reached up and brushed her thumb across my cheek. Soil. Just a streak of dirt from the garden. But the gesture was intimate in a way that neither of us could ignore. Her touch was light, almost absent-minded, but my skin burned where her thumb lingered. My breath caught, not because of the dirt, but because of her. She seemed to realize it too. Her hand dropped quickly, her composure snapping back into place. She cleared her throat, turning back toward the flower bed as if the moment had never happened. But it had. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling the ghost of her touch, the warmth of it still alive on my cheek. The space between us suddenly felt narrower, as though the garden itself had conspired to draw us closer. And though she avoided my eyes for the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't stop replaying that small, fleeting contact. It wasn't just a brush of soil. It was the crack in the wall she kept so carefully built. And I knew, sooner or later, those walls would crumble. It happened on a night when the rain refused to let up. Sheets of water blurred the streetlights, and the wind pushed against the windows as if trying to find its way inside. I had stopped by with a book she had asked to borrow, not intending to stay. But when the storm rolled in heavier, she insisted I wait it out. The power flickered once, twice, and then everything went dark. She sighed softly, shaking her head, then rummaged through a drawer until she found a box of matches and a few half-burned candles. Soon the room glowed with a soft golden light, shadows stretching long across the walls, the storm muffled outside. We settled onto the couch, closer than we had ever sat before, though neither of us acknowledged it. The candlelight softened her features, painting her in warmth. She looked less guarded, more human, as though the darkness outside had given her permission to lower her armor. At first, we talked in low voices, words drifting lazily between us. She asked about my family, and I asked about her travels, and the kind of stories she carried from a life already half-lived. The rain filled the pauses, steady and rhythmic, like the world was listening in. Then thunder cracked overhead, sudden, sharp. She flinched, just slightly, her shoulders tensing. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. It was instinct, not intention. But once my fingers closed around hers, I couldn't bring myself to let go. Her hand was cool at first, delicate, the skin soft against my palm. But then her grip tightened, just enough to let me know she wasn't pulling away. That small act, the decision not to retreat, was louder than any words could have been. The conversation faltered, then faded altogether. Silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable but charged, filled with the sound of rain and the faint crackle of candlewick. I became aware of everything, the way her thumb rested lightly against my hand, the steady rhythm of her breath, the faint scent of jasmine and rain in her hair. After a while, she shifted, leaning almost imperceptibly until her shoulder brushed against me. And then, with a quiet sigh, her head found its way to my shoulder. Time seemed to slow. Her cheek rested against me, warm, steady. I felt the gentle weight of her presence, the rise and fall of her breath sinking with mine. My chest tightened, not with nerves, but with something softer, something terrifying in its simplicity, the desire for this closeness never to end. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The storm raged outside, but inside, everything was still. Safe. I stared into the flickering candlelight, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe too deeply, in case the moment shattered. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a declaration. But it was a line crossed, subtle, quiet, undeniable. And as her head remained against me, her hand still in mine, I realized we had stepped into something that neither of us could so easily turn away from. The morning after the storm, I couldn't stop replaying the way her head had rested against my shoulder, the way her hand had stayed in mine. It had been quiet, simple, and yet it echoed louder than any words. I thought, or maybe I hoped, that she felt it too. But when I saw her again, she was different. She greeted me at the door with a polite smile, but the warmth I had come to expect wasn't there. Her voice was formal, her gestures careful. She offered me tea, but she didn't linger in the kitchen the way she usually did. She kept her distance, as if drawing invisible lines between us. At first, I tried to ignore it, to pretend it was nothing. But the distance grew heavier, and soon I couldn't hold my silence. I set my cup down, the clink against the saucer sharper than I intended. "Why are you pulling away?" I asked softly. She froze, her back to me, then exhaled slowly. "I'm not," she murmured. "You are," I said. My voice was steady, though my heart pounded. "Last night, it meant something. To me. Did it not to you?" She turned then, and I saw the struggle written across her face. Her composure was still there, but it was fragile, a mask stretched thin. Her hands twisted the edge of her shawl as she looked at me. "It did," she admitted, her voice low. "It meant too much." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I opened my mouth, but she shook her head quickly, as if to stop me before I could push further. "You don't understand," she whispered. "People will talk. They already do, about less. I've lost once, I know what it is to give everything, and then," her voice caught, just for a moment, before she steadied herself again. "I don't know if I can open that door. Not with you. Not now." I felt the weight of her fear, the honesty in it. She wasn't hiding behind teasing smirks or playful remarks anymore. She was bearing the raw truth, that she wanted this, and it terrified her. I moved closer, slow, careful, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. Instead, her eyes followed me, uncertain but unyielding. I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over hers. Her fingers trembled under mine, but she didn't pull away. "I'm not asking you to decide everything right now," I said. "I'm just asking you not to pretend it isn't real. Because it is. And I'm here, whether the world approves or not." Her lips parted, as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, her eyes softened, glistening with the weight of emotions she had kept locked away. For a long moment, we sat in silence, my hand over hers, her breath uneven, her heart caught between fear and longing. It wasn't a resolution. Not yet. But it was the closest we had come to truth. And sometimes, truth is the first step toward courage. Days passed, and I gave her space. I didn't call, didn't knock on her door, though every part of me wanted to. I thought maybe that was what she needed, distance to make sense of what she truly felt. But the silence was heavier than I expected. Each night, I replayed her words, her fears, the way her hand had trembled beneath mine. And then, one evening, I found myself standing outside her house again. I hadn't planned it. My feet had simply carried me there, as if they knew better than my mind. The windows glowed with warm light, spilling faintly onto the quiet street. For a moment, I almost turned back, afraid I'd only be met with the same polite distance. But then the door opened before I could knock. She stood there, framed in the soft light, her expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said quietly, "I thought you might come." There was no smirk this time, no teasing challenge. Her voice was softer, almost vulnerable. I stepped inside, and she closed the door behind me. The air carried the familiar scent of lavender and something simmering faintly in the kitchen: comfort, warmth, home. She didn't lead me to the table or pour tea as she usually did. Instead, she turned to face me right there in the entryway, her hands clasped together as if holding herself steady. "I've been afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling despite her composed stance. "Afraid of what people will think. Afraid of what it means to feel this again. Afraid of wanting you." The confession broke something open between us. I didn't rush to answer. I let the weight of her honesty settle. Then I closed the space between us, slow enough for her to stop me if she chose. She didn't move. When I reached her, I placed my hands gently at her waist, tentative, giving her every chance to step away. Instead, she exhaled, a long, unsteady breath, and then her arms rose, slipping around me. The embrace was steady, grounding. Her cheek rested against my chest, and I felt her heartbeat, strong, insistent, alive. My chin brushed her hair as I closed my eyes, letting the moment envelop us both. We stood there, not speaking, just breathing together. The outside world, with all its rules and judgments, felt distant, irrelevant. What mattered was the quiet truth between us: neither of us wanted to let go. When she finally leaned back, her eyes searched mine. There was no hesitation left in them, only resolve. "Stay," she whispered. The word was simple, but it carried everything: her fear, her longing, her choice. I nodded, pulling her back into me, holding her as though I could anchor us both. And in that embrace, I knew, the smirks, the teasing, the walls, the hesitation, all of it had led here, to this moment of truth. We had chosen, together. And we weren't pretending anymore. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video so more people can discover it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have taken the same chance, or walked away? And if you enjoy heartfelt age gap romances like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, so you never miss the next story.